Welcome. We're going back in time again with Rick Clunn. This is the January-February 1972 issue. The cover of this magazine was, this magazine really probably played a bigger role in my career than any other magazine that we will go over, even though I wasn't even actively fishing at this time. But this is where I was really at the stage in my career where I was really trying to say, do I have the guts to quit mainstream society and go do something that everybody's going to think you're crazy, and that was fish tournaments. And there's a lot of things that influenced me and finally gave me the courage to do it. I'd actually joined a bass club in the late 60s, the Pasadena Bass Club in Pasadena, Texas. And that's really where my tournament interest began. And definitely that's where I started to take a quantum leap in knowledge of fishing. I'd fished my whole life with my dad, small creeks, ponds, everything you can imagine, ditches, you know, anything that I thought might hold a fish. And there was another event before the Classic, actually, and most people probably, I'm just curious how many of you will even be aware of this, and probably not very many unless you were from the state of Texas. And it was called the Texas State Bass Tournament. It was by far the oldest tournament of all tournaments. The first year it was held was 1956, okay? Even in BASS, you know, that's 10, 15 years before BASS even started. And it was put on by a guy named Earl Golding, who was the outdoor editor for the Waco Tribune Herald in Texas. And it was an unusual event because there's no prizes to speak of. It was just who's the best fisherman in the state. And they had many, many divisions. I mean, they had individual division, they had team divisions, they had you and your wife division, husband, wives. They had you and your son divisions. They had, I mean, they're just endless amount. There'd be over 1,000 entries in it every year, even back then, which was unheard of. And it was, I'd joined the Bass Club in the 60s and hadn't really done that great. But then in 1970, I'd been following this big tournament. And I decided to fish it. And it was on Toledo Bend, 1970, and I ended up second. And that really went a long ways in me having confidence that maybe I could do this thing that's starting now at a national level with BASS. And of course, I kept following it, and I kept following it, and kept trying to, you know, again, say, can I do this? And anyway, but the following thing that really made me really say, I've got to try, was this particular event here. This is the first BassMaster Classic ever held. It was held in 1971, and it was held on Lake Mead. Of course, it wasn't, you know, reported on and you know, in a magazine until January, February 1972. And it was just such an unusual event. All of a sudden, here's a national magazine covering a bass tournament. And Ray Scott, he knew he had to come up with something he could put on tournaments all year and put them on year after year. But he knew he needed a showcase tournament. Every sport has a showcase tournament. They have the Super Bowl, the World Series, and you name whatever sport it is, and they'll have that showcase tournament, the best of the best. And Ray knew that, so he created this event. And it was really a unique event because one of the things in fishing that's always been true, I don't care how far back in time you go, even to now, was the legitimacy of it, okay? Fishermen were kind of known as liars to begin with, but that was at least their reputation back then. So he had to create something that he thought was a level playing field and was the best of the best. And this would be truly, and how he did that was really unique, is that he didn't tell anybody at the end of the year, the ones who qualified, he didn't tell anybody where they were going. And he, until they got on in an airplane 30,000 feet in the air, and then he'd announce, okay, this Bassmaster Classic is going to be at Lake Mead in Nevada. Nobody ever fished Lake Mead in Nevada. So that's even made it more level playing field. It wasn't like you had one guy that lived there and on his life and guided on that lake. So that's what he was attempting to do, and that really caught my attention. And again, look at these boats, okay? Any of you know what boats were in the Classic back then? Because for years and years and years, there was a certain boat that dominated the Classic. And that was one of the hardest things to keep it a secret. But when Forrest Wood finally, was providing the Ranger boats for the Classic, they had to get those things to this secret lake without anybody figuring out where they were going. And you can't believe how many guys would go, hey, I saw a bunch of Ranger boats come through Chattanooga, Tennessee today. They were headed east. And everybody was starting to guess and tell. But they did a really pretty amazing job of keeping it a secret somehow. I don't know how they did that. But these were not Ranger boats. These were actually inboard outboards. They weren't outboards. This was a boat, and I could be wrong here, but I'm pretty sure they were a boat called Rebel. And I'm not even sure who back then made them, probably a company called Rebel. But, and as you can see back then, what's unique about them taking off, it was still a shotgun start. Shotgun starts were like trying to run the rapids in the Grand Canyon about 100 yards once they took off, because there were waves coming from every direction. But finally, they finally got rid of those, thank goodness. But and it was basically won by Bobby Murray, and he won $10,000. And it blew me away that I was only making $10,000 a year at that time in working for the second largest computing center in the world. And all of a sudden, here's one guy in one fishing tournament, just won $10,000. Of course, you have to do your due diligence to really realize, how much money that is, because you got expenses and entry fees and all that kind of thing. But still, that really gave me a lot of the material I needed mentally to say, yeah, I'm going to. And this was 1972. And eventually, I quit my job, which I did do in March of 1974. So it still took me a little while and several events in my career to really convince me to do it. And now, looking back on it, going back in time, it just amazes me all this little things that happened that finally pushed me one more step in that direction, one more step. And how many times it scares me when I think back, how many of those events, if they hadn't happened, would I not, I'd never done it. I would have not done it. And it was, I guess really the thing that gave me the most courage to finally do it was that my father-in-law at that time was working for NASA, and he was really a good golfer. And he tested a lot of these machines and had to, instruments go on the spaceships and the space capsules, G-force machines, where he'd put and I don't remember about just going by his story, where you slide a little instrument of some type up under this deal, and it gets whacked by a bunch of G-force. And they tested, because, all of you have seen TV shows of these spaceships and what they have to go through. And he accidentally got his hand caught under it, and it crushed his hand, and his golfing days were over. But I know a lot of Sundays I'd sit and watch Arnold Palmer and Jack Nicklaus and all these golfers, and I'll never forget sitting there in the chair next to him, how he'd go, I could have done that. I was so much better than most of the players. I could have beat them guys. And that's saying a lot. And no, he would, but here's the thing, he wasn't a bragging time. He's the only true gentleman I've ever known in my whole life. And I'd have to sit here and tell you what a gentleman is, because he's the one that taught me what a gentle man was. So for him to say that, it said a lot. But the thing is, I could feel the regret that he'd never tried it. And then that's finally hit me. I don't want to know that feeling. I don't want to know that regret of not trying it. Maybe I can't do it. Maybe I'll fail. But at least I know I tried. So that's, again, this really brings back a lot of memories and a lot of things I'm sure I have forgotten, but you know, and you go through the magazine, and it's pretty much a lot of the same stuff that is in the other ones. But here's the Classic Challenge, and there's Bobby Murray. He'd just gotten over a real bad car wreck, and we're still putting them on stringers. You can see there. But the other key to his that he won it using a technique that probably one of my greatest teachers ever taught me. And I've mentioned him several times. Elroy Kruger from San Antonio, burning a spinnerbait. And that's how Bobby won it. He won it running in the very backs of the canyon to Lake Mead in crystal clear water and catching big fish in very shallow water, which all the locals said was impossible unless you were using water dogs, live water dogs, burning a spinnerbait. And I love that technique. And so it's just so many of those things just kind of pointed me kind of toward in that direction and giving me the courage. And of course, Lake Mead is still to this day what I consider the most fair lake you could ever fish a tournament in. And the reason why you say that, because so many lakes you go to, over time we've learned you got to be fishing a certain area if you're going to win it. You know, Lake Powell, even the one above it, if you're not in the San Juan River, you're probably not going to win the tournament. You know, all the lakes in the east pretty much are that same way. There's certain areas that you know at Toledo Bend, if you're not fishing around the high drill, you're probably not going to win it. Mead's not that way. Mead didn't have any local champions. Mead, every year you went, was a different lake. It could be 25 feet lower, it could be 50 feet lower, or it could be 100 feet higher, which means you were fishing a completely different body of water. And so to this day, and I've won 2 U.S. Opens out there, and it's an incredibly fair lake. No 2 years is it going to be won in the same area. I just kind of looking through here to see, you know, anglers that a lot of you probably know that actually fished that first classic. And I see fathers, I know a lot of the sons, I see their fathers fish this classic. Pete Pons, Bob Pons fished it. Bill Fletcher, his son Fletcher fished it. He still fishes some, Jeff. And then there's Shorty Evans from some of you guys in Missouri, was an undertaker from Houston, Missouri. It's really fascinates me, like I said, to go back and you know, just see the names. Of course, Roland Martin, he ended up 4th. You know, it was, and the way he ended up 4th was that Bobby had kind of told him how he was catching them, and so he ended up catching a really typical Roland coming back on the final day. Joe Kennedy from Euless, Texas. No, that's probably not. That's Kennedy's father, Steve. But anyway, it just amazed me, you know, to go back in time again and see how many of these guys, even though they may not be fishing, Bobby's not fishing, he's still fishing, but he's not fishing tournaments anymore. A lot of them are not here anymore, but it's just a really, really neat event. There's one other thing that really, this magazine is a huge step in the survival of bass fishing as a sport. And we'll get to that here in a little bit. But I'm just looking, just again, it just amazes me to. But anyway, Ray always had Harry and Charlie stuff in it, and there was another set of cartoons he had here, which I found amusing. It's these cartoons about the view of the future of bass fishing. Look at this one, you have to look at it pretty close. This is what, you know, fishing will eventually become. IBM computer, these huge depth finders, and I know these are all cartoons, fictional, but they're not. Today, technology, it's sure, due to the fact back then we didn't know they were going to make it small, because back then the IBM computers I worked on, were the biggest in the world and the fastest in the world, and they were the size of a refrigerator. So things obviously went the other direction with the technology. But it's crazy when you look at this, and the giant guys, he says, now nobody's going to outrun me. It has this giant boat on the back. We kind of went that direction too, with bigger and bigger engines all the time. Anyway, here's probably the biggest thing that Ray Scott did, and again in his genius. He was a genius about some things, or either he's just dang lucky, I don't know which. But tournament with the twist. Can you imagine what that twist was? It was the first, this year's circuit was going to be the first live wells in tournaments. They were going to demand you have a live well in your boat to keep your fish. You could no longer put them on a stringer. They were going to really, truly attempt to keep them alive. And so the first live wells they weren't the greatest things in the world, but they were light year ahead of a stringer. And it even made us as the anglers feel better, because we're not a whole lot different, if you just think about it in a natural way, different than a bear in one of those streams and rivers in Alaska that's swatting fish. He's killing it, but he knows that fish is what keeps him alive. An eagle, an osprey, a loon, these fish is what keeps them alive. And early bass tournament fishermen knew that this was such an important element to them having a career in something they love to do. And it was a huge, huge first step. Prize money, kept going up, but it was always these other organizations that came into effect that drove them up. This was the first $50,000 prize money in 1971, and it was on Lake Sam Rayburn, and 2 local boys won it. Why this was important, it was simply competition that would force, your competitors was what forced you to become better. And these organizations forced bass to compete, to have to step up and provide a bigger purse just so you could survive. One of the things too is that I'm a big believer in the Trickster long drop blade. And this is the spinnerbait that Bobby Murray won the Classic on. It was called a Zorro spinnerbait. But Bobby, he was like Elroy Kruger. He truly understood the relationship between head, weight, and blade water displacement. And the most popular spinnerbait nowadays is a small 3/8 ounce with willow leaf, because they're user-friendly, they're compatible with each other, but they're not really great for catching big fish. They catch numbers, but not big fish. And that's what you have to have, a blade that displaces water, that gives the illusion to the fish's lateral line that it's a bigger bite, it's more food, and that will attract a bigger bite. And that's been proven to me through my career. And this you see on Bobby's spinnerbait, he had a Colorado blades. They weren't willow leaves. My biggest stringer when I won in 2019 was the Trickster long drop blade. It got flash of a willow leaf, but it's got the water displacement of a Colorado or Indiana. And so it's just the things, I forget the saying, but fishing is the mother of invention or something like that. But not fishing, Rick Clunn. Basically competition, all these things make you constantly try to figure out how to do it better, and what works better. There you are, 1972, January, February.